Welcome back to the news at 7. We are talking about the Indiana governor's debate that happened last night. 6 Republican candidates all on stage. Joining me right now here on the news at 7 is Laura Wilson. She is a political science professor for the University of Indianapolis. Laura, thank you for your time. Laura, I wanted to start first, before we actually get to the debate that happened last night. A recent poll that came out about 5 days ago shows that right now, the contest is honestly not that much of a contest, with Mike Braun in several different categories: crime, public safety, taxes, the economy, education. He's at 50% on polls. In some of those categories, like crime and taxes, he's at more than 50%. The closest candidate, Suzanne Crouch, at 15%, 20% on education. So I guess what I want to start with, Laura, is based off of last night's debate, do you think anything has changed as far as the race and the standings in the race going forward?
Sure. I do think it's likely changed, although not necessarily in terms of one candidate eclipsing another. As you mentioned, Braun is in a tremendous lead and really well outpacing all the other candidates. But that same poll showed that there were 43% of Hoosier voters who were undecided, and they didn't know which candidate they would want to support. And I do think that's one of the benefits of debates, forums, things like these, because the people that are tuning in are naturally going to be invested and interested. They're informed and educated, but they may not have made up their mind yet. And certainly getting to see all 6 candidates on the stage, hearing their opinions on things like referendums and economic development, COVID-19, the role of government and involvement, I think that is very helpful for voters.
What stood out to you last night, Professor? Was there a moment? Was there a moment or two? Was there a candidate who really shined? What stood out to you?
I definitely stood out the fact that Mike Braun was the focus, and that makes sense given what we know in terms of the polls. But you saw several candidates pile on there. You heard from Eric Doden and Curtis Hill. Why would he want to serve in this kind of role? Chambers was also attacked as a candidate, even though he's not doing nearly as well in the polling. But questions about what he's done in office and some of the political questions. And I thought Rettenauer did a good job distancing herself. She's been furthest down in some of those polls, but being able to position herself as the much more further right conservative Christian candidate, really focusing in terms of that religious aspect piece. So I think there were several different moments there where each of the candidates are trying to position themselves, of course, attack the top, right, but look across the stage and really try to be able to engage with the audience and sell voters on why they would be the best next leader of our state.
I know there are 2 different pundits who believed that the individual in second place right now, Lieutenant Governor Suzanne Crouch, did not have the strongest performance last night. Would you agree or disagree with that?
Well, I don't think she had maybe quite as many opportunities, and it's always tricky when you're in second place in this kind of thing. Of course, first place is what wins and ultimately matters. She has a really interesting background, having served in state government underneath Governor Eric Holcomb, but also having served in county government. I think there may have been some missed opportunities, but as we know, this is the first of many debates, so I don't think it makes or breaks any one particular candidate.
Laura, when I was a reporter in South Bend, Curtis Hill was actually the Elkhart County prosecutor. So I met with him, interviewed him several times. Interesting, charismatic candidate who has also had some controversy follow his way in his career. He's in an interesting spot because when you get those candidates who are towards the bottom of the polls, they generally need to be a little bit more aggressive. I know he was on the attack last night. Were there any of those candidates that currently are polling around the 5% mark, like a Curtis Hill, who you think were aggressive enough to make any sort of difference in the race?
Well, I think Curtis Hill was, since you mentioned him, certainly trying to attack the question of Braun. If he served so successfully in the Senate, why would he want to be governor? I thought Braun also had a really strong quip back to Hill on that. But I thought Hill was probably the most successful in terms of those lower polling candidates being aggressive. And that's also kind of a balance because you don't want to look like you're a bully or an attack dog. I think for Hill, given his political background and what he's done in office, it makes more sense having served as attorney general. That is maybe more of aggressive or certainly the kind of office where you would expect to see maybe that kind of disposition rather. I think he was probably the most successful in terms of the candidates to do that. But again, I'd emphasize that balance. You want to still be appealing to voters while you're trying to knock down the top candidates who are taking up some of that polling you want to have yourself.
Next debate, Professor, is not until the end of the month. How do you see that debate playing out, and who do you think needs to make a move there?
Well, I think this one will be really interesting. What I'm looking for in terms of the candidates is to see how they position themselves and really how it changes from this debate when you have a couple weeks to fine tune, to look at more polling data, to get a better sense of what people thought you did well and what you need to work on. Right? I think when you're looking at the people that have the most to lose, it's really Braun at the top kind of single-handedly, but for Crouch, wanting to be more effective, wanting to be able to take more command of the stage, really try to push herself up there. And I think you see the same thing in terms of all of those candidates with regards to Chambers, Doden, Hill. Rittenhour seemed to carve out a niche for herself. Maybe trying to expand on that would be certainly important in the next debate too.
I can see some of our viewers looking at the race right now and saying, I don't need to pay much attention to this because Senator Mike Braun obviously is going to be the next governor of Indiana. But I really thought you brought up an excellent point at the beginning of our conversation when you said the amount of undecided voters there still are. It's a pretty large amount. Do you think that amount could make a difference still in the race?
Absolutely. 43%. That's incredible. And part of that is you have a lot of candidates. So it's not necessarily that people don't know who these individuals are, but they're trying to make a decision. And I think that's very fair. They still have a couple weeks before they make that decision, right? But if any one candidate was able to take maybe not all 43%, but a sizable percent of that, it would drastically change where they stand in terms of the rankings of six candidates. I think it's very important. And of course, with each given debate, we expect that 43% will continue to shrink down as voters get a better sense of the candidates and their issues, and they ultimately are making their decisions of who they're going to support.
Professor Laura Wilson, professor of political science at University of Indianapolis, joining us here on the News at 7. Professor Wilson, thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll be back right after this.